Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Clara Monroe was just one cog among many in the immense machine of society. Vanguard Industries. Every morning, she crossed the threshold of the skyscraper with the same understated elegance, her brilliant idea submerged in an ocean of protocols and figures. Yet, in the eyes of Richard Davenport, the charismatic but ruthless CEO, she was nothing more than a tool, a brilliant employee, certainly, but interchangeable. The day she dared to publicly challenge a strategic decision, Richard saw red. In a tense meeting, he berated her in front of everyone, his cutting words leaving Clara frozen, hurt but silent. She left the company a few days later, bitterness her only companion. But Clara wasn't one to be easily sidelined. During those months of withdrawal, she transformed her pain into strength. Her skills were honed, her creativity exploded, and her quiet charisma became almost magnetic. When she reappeared, she was no longer the shy young employee, but a dazzling, self-assured woman, capable of captivating an entire room of investors with just a single word. Richard, who was attending her presentation at an international summit, felt his world crumble. Breathless, his heart pounding, he realized with horror that he had underestimated this woman he thought he had dominated. Clara, standing on stage, radiated power and confidence, every gesture calculated to show that she no longer needed his approval. When their eyes met, Richard knew it was too late for arrogance. The woman he had treated like a mere tool was now a force he couldn't control. In a mixture of fear and admiration, he whispered barely audibly, "Clara, please, come back." But Clara, with an enigmatic smile, knew that reconciliation would not be an easy path. She now held the cards, and this time, she would be the one calling the shots. The hall of Vanguard Industries. The hurried footsteps of executives and assistants echoed. The glass walls reflected the sunlight, but no brightness could mask the electric atmosphere that reigned that morning. Clara Monroe stepped through the doors, her black coat perfectly tailored, her gaze confident and defiant. Each step seemed to echo as a silent challenge to the world she had left behind. The employees who recognized her murmured amongst themselves, some astonished, others envious. She was no longer the shy young analyst, she had become the embodiment of what they could never achieve. In his office, Richard Davenport nervously flipped through a file. His heart pounded at a pace he hadn't felt in years. And then he saw her. Clara, standing by the large bay window, watching the city with an enigmatic smile. Every movement exuded self-control and power. As she walked into the meeting room, all eyes turned to her. The investors present applauded politely, but it was nothing compared to the tense silence that enveloped Richard. He felt his throat tighten, unable to utter a single word. Clara placed her belongings on the table, stared at Richard, and spoke in a clear, confident, and slightly icy voice. "Hello, Richard. It seems our paths have crossed again." Richard forced a smile, trying to mask the anguish that was gnawing at him. "Clara. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Nor will I return to this place that I left with so many memories," she said with a slight trembling that was only perceptible to those who knew how to read between the lines. Every word Clara spoke seemed to carry the weight of a silent judgment. Richard felt his years of authority crumble before this woman who had once been under his control. He realized he could no longer consider her a mere tool. The reconciliation he so desperately wanted now had to be earned. Silence fell, heavy and charged with tension. Clara, with a half-smile, turned back to the investors. "Now, let's talk business." And as she delivered her brilliant and precise presentation, Richard couldn't help but think that he had just underestimated the strength of the one he thought he could ignore. Clara had regained control of the room as if she had always belonged there. Every slide of her presentation captivated the audience, every word was carefully chosen to impress and persuade. But for Richard, it was a different story. Every figure, every idea clearly demonstrated that he had underestimated her. After the meeting, the investors congratulated her warmly, but Richard remained frozen by the bay window. He felt pride burning in his chest and fear gripping him. Clara approached slowly, her heels clicking on the floor. "You seem surprised, Richard," she said with a thin smile. I didn't expect you to be so brilliant, so quickly, he stammered, unable to find the right words. Clara crossed her arms, her sharp gaze leaving no room for illusion. It's not a question of speed. It's a question of knowing your worth and refusing to be underestimated. Richard lowered his gaze, aware of his own past arrogance. He still remembered the day he had humiliated her in front of everyone, believing his position would be enough to break her. Now, she stood there, calm, majestic, and invincible. Clara. I want you to know that I regret what happened, he said in a lower, almost pleading voice. Clara gave a small, barely audible laugh that made Richard shudder. Regret isn't enough, Richard. Actions speak louder than words. And I've come back to show that I can control my own destiny. Do you understand? He nodded silently, knowing he had to earn her trust, not assume it. Clara turned on her heel and left the office, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts and the weight of his mistakes. In the corridors, whispers abounded, "It's incredible. She's changed. Davenport underestimated her power." Richard heard them all, but what troubled him most was unspoken: Clara no longer needed him. And this truth unsettled him more than anything. As she walked down to the lobby, Clara felt a new energy within her. She was no longer the fragile employee they had thought they could control. She was free, strong, and ready to write her own future. And Richard, for the first time in years, understood that he would have to learn to play by her rules, if she would even let him in. A few weeks had passed since Clara's return. Every day, she proved to everyone, and especially to Richard, that she was no longer the same. Her bold initiatives and innovative strategies captivated the management team and even forced investors to recognize her as an indispensable pillar of Vanguard Industries. Richard watched her every move, his thoughts oscillating between admiration and frustration. He had believed that his CEO title gave him a natural authority over her, but each meeting with Clara painfully reminded him that power isn't simply a matter of having a name on a business card. One morning, in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, Clara presented a new strategic project, a bold merger that could propel the company to the top of the international market. Her confidence captivated everyone, and even the most skeptical analysts seemed mesmerized. Richard spoke, attempting to regain a position of authority. "Clara, I understand your perspective, but don't forget that we must consider the risks." She looked at him calmly, a slight smile on her lips. "I know exactly what risks we're taking, Richard. And I also know that underestimating my preparation would be a mistake." He felt his breath catch. Every word Clara spoke was a silent lesson in power and control. He understood that, from now on, she set the rules. He was no longer the one who decided, but the one who had to follow and learn to earn her respect and trust. After the meeting, Richard kept her in his office. Her hands were trembling slightly, a mixture of nervousness and admiration. "Clara, I have to ask you, could you consider working alongside me on this project?" Clara stared at him for a moment, carefully weighing her words. "Richard, I can work alongside you, but on one condition, that you recognize that I am not your tool. That we be partners, not master and employee." He lowered his head, aware that this truth had just placed him in a position he had never known. And for the first time, Richard realized that the woman he had thought he could ignore had not only changed his world, but had become the key to his future and that of the company. Clara, satisfied, gave a subtle smile, a mixture of triumph and mercy. "So, Richard, let's play by my rules." And so, a new balance was born: Richard, confronted with his own vulnerability, and Clara, mistress of her destiny, determined never to be underestimated again. The International Summit of Vanguard Industries. The event was in full swing. Clara, standing before the audience, embodied perfection, calm, charismatic, and with an assurance that made her almost unassailable. The investors listened, captivated by every word, every gesture, every idea she presented. Richard stood apart, watching with a mixture of pride and regret. He had tried to orchestrate this reconciliation, to convince her to fully return to his wing, but he now understood that those days were over. Clara needed no one to shine, and certainly not him. After her masterful presentation, as applause erupted in the room, Clara approached Richard. The silence that settled between them was heavy with memories, regrets, and lessons learned. "Richard," she said softly, "I commend you for your efforts, but I am no longer the person you thought you could control. I decide my own choices, and I choose my own path." Richard, feeling his heart tighten, almost murmured to himself, "I know, and I don't want to be the one making decisions for you anymore. But I can't deny that I need you by my side." Clara smiled, but that smile was no longer the smile of submission she once had been. It was proof of her regained power. "We will work together, Richard. But as allies, never as superior and subordinate. If you accept that, we will go far. Otherwise, I will forge my own path." Richard nodded, finally understanding that he had to let go of his pride and accept Clara's strength and independence. For the first time in years, he saw her as she truly was, brilliant, free, and unwavering. "So, partners," he said simply. Clara held out her hand, and when they shook it, the gesture sealed a new dynamic. Richard knew he had been dazzled by her power and had lost all control, but he had also gained something far more precious, the respect and admiration of a woman who would never again allow herself to be dominated. That day, Clara Monroe was no longer simply an employee who had come back from a past injustice. She had become an unavoidable force, and Richard, finally aware of his mistake, had to learn to walk beside her, and not in front of her. The world had changed, and in this brilliant light, everyone now knew who truly held the power.